Talk about saying the quiet part out loud. The House Judiciary Committee held an emergency meeting today for markups on a legislative package called the Protecting Our Kids Act. It would raise the minimum age to purchase a semi-automatic rifle from 18 to 21 years old. It would further regulate so-called ghost guns, and it would ban new large-capacity magazines. There's also talk of addressing red flag laws within this legislative package as well. Now, just a few quick notes on the idea of raising the minimum age to purchase a rifle. One, that's unworkable because we have young guys in the military right now who need to be trained in the use of a rifle. It's quite literally part of their job description. And two, California just tried banning the purchase of such firearms to young adults under the age of 21. And they failed because last month a U.S. appeals court, specifically the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco, ruled that such a ban is unconstitutional. I know President Trump did a lot to change the ideological leanings of the Ninth Circuit during his time in office, but it's been notoriously left-leaning for a while. And even still, in that decision, Judge Ryan Nelson wrote, quote, "America would not exist without the heroism of the young adults who fought and died in our Revolutionary Army. Today, we reaffirm that our Constitution still protects the right that enabled their sacrifice, the right of young adults to keep and bear arms," end quote. But Democrats in Congress would never let anything as trifling as the Constitution and its Bill of Rights get in the way of their power grab. Just listen to what New York Democrat Congressman Mondaire Jones had to say today. And remember what I said earlier about saying the quiet part out loud.
We can't let you get away with this anymore. Enough is enough. Enough of you telling us that school shootings are a fact of life when every other country like ours has virtually ended it. Enough of you blaming mental illness and then defunding mental health care in this country. Enough of your thoughts and prayers. Enough. Enough. You will not stop us from advancing the Protecting Our Kids Act today. You will not stop us from passing it in the House next week, and you will not stop us there. If the filibuster obstructs us, we will abolish it. If the Supreme Court objects, we will expand it, and we will not rest until we have taken weapons of war out of circulation in our communities.
As Timothy Carney from the Washington Examiner and the AEI noted dryly, what's next? If the Bill of Rights stops us, we'll shred it. As we talked about last summer, the National Archives has already slapped trigger warnings onto our nation's founding documents, warning visitors before they view the documents that what they're about to read may be harmful and may reflect outdated, biased, offensive, and possibly violent views and opinions. They're practically a step away from shredding the document entirely already. And did you notice the vitriol Democrats now have whenever they talk about thoughts and prayers? They spit on it. They spit on God like he's nothing compared to them and their great glory. It reminds me of how the Democrat Party at their national convention back in 2012 removed explicit mention of God from their party platform. The move drew so much heat that the party had to reinstitute God, despite boos and disapproval from their delegates and constituents who voted to keep God off their platform. You can watch the video online. I know there's a lot of anger and hurt right now over the recent spate of mass shootings that our nation has endured, but how come there isn't the same level of outrage after every weekend of deaths in cities like Chicago? We're talking many deaths there too. In fact, in those cities, tough luck trying to find a prosecutor willing to prosecute criminals for violating gun laws. Those are usually some of the first charges to be dropped in securing a plea deal. If you try and enforce those laws, you get called a racist. So explain that one to me. Maybe it's because the left identifies mass shootings with white people or the right in general, whether or not it's true in any given situation. And they identify street crime with their political base, even though the latter is the biggest contributor to gun deaths each and every year when excluding suicides. Remember, the left isn't anti-gun per se. They're just anti-conservative patriots, you name it, having guns. They're completely fine with Antifa and gangbangers being armed to the teeth, or the convicted felons who were illegally carrying in Kenosha, Wisconsin last year when they tried to kill Kyle Rittenhouse for dousing their fires, 2020 I should say. And that's why they find themselves illogically calling to blame and punish a law-abiding person for the crimes of an evil person miles away. We don't take cars away or licenses away from law-abiding drivers every time there's a fatality on the highways. More than 46,000 people die on our roads Each year, that's nothing to sniff at. That's a lot of people. A similar amount, actually slightly less, die from gun-related injuries each year, though it should be pointed out that more than half of those are suicides. If someone wants to argue that I'm comparing apples to oranges here, just remember the terror attack in Nice, France for Bastille Day celebrations back in 2016. A 31-year-old Tunisian man killed 86 people, largely with a giant truck, which he drove into the crowds as they watched a firework display. Where there's an evil will, there's a way. ISIS later claimed responsibility for the attack, and authorities say the killer had radicalized too quickly to be found on any government radars. We also know how much damage a bomb can do as well, killing dozens at a time. The fact here is America's always had guns, but it hasn't always had mass shooters. The pioneer kids who grew up using their dad's rifle to hunt for dinner never thought about bringing it to the little schoolhouse on the prairie to use on their classmates, even though it sat right by the door every day on their way in and out. What we are experiencing is an entirely new phenomenon brought about by our godless culture, which mass produces nihilistic and angry people. At that same hearing today, Kentucky Congressman Thomas Massie tried to bring some sanity back to the conversation. Here's what he had to add.
Wow, the Democrats, I don't know if they're just in willful ignorance of what happens in this country or they're being deceptive today, but would like to introduce into the record a list of cases where concealed handgun permit holders have likely stopped mass public shootings. This is from crimeresearch.org. It was published May 27th, 2022.
Without objection.
I'll read from this list, and I'm going to run out of time, but I'll try to make each of these summaries brief because there are dozens of instances. Even though the media doesn't want to report them, sometimes they get reported. Just this week. Last week, May 25th, 2022, Charleston, West Virginia. Here, a man with an extensive criminal history started firing an AR-15 style firearm into a crowd. Fortunately, a woman who was legally carrying a gun was there to stop the attack. She shot the attacker. It ended before anybody got hurt. South Fulton, Georgia, May 3rd, 2022. A teenager started firing his gun at multiple people. There was a large number of people present at the park because of an anti-violence riot. South Fulton, Georgia, this comes from a news report. Meadows said the men involved in the shootout with Hambrick have been cooperative and will likely not be charged since the teenager fired the first shot. After having reviewed most of the witnesses' statements, it appears that the descendant, Mr. Hambrick, discharged his weapon first, and as a result of that, there was an exchange of gunfire between him and two individuals, good guys with the gun.
Joining me now to discuss is Gavin Wax, the president of the New York Young Republicans Club and the global digital director for the new social media platform Getter. Thanks for being here tonight, Gavin.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Great. So how insane is it to hear a sitting Democrat congressman talk about bullying the courts, sneering at God, and threatening to tear down any last institutional norms like the filibuster to pass more gun-grabbing laws?
Well, we've gone through this show before. Every time there is a horrific mass shooting in this country, the Democrats are the first to leap into so-called action to politicize it and use it as a means to attack our constitutional rights. They are not interested in actually lowering the rate of gun violence in this country. If they were, places like Chicago and many of the locales and states that they run would be safe, crime-free utopias, but they're the exact opposite. I mean, most of our mass shootings are gang-related or drug-related and happen in these inner cities. And I think the crux of the issue that we're really facing in this country is not a gun problem, it's a mental health crisis. It's a mental health crisis. There's a common thread with all of these mass shooters. They come from broken homes. They have mental health issues. Many of them are on various antidepressants and other types of, prescription drugs that are also messing with their internal psyche. And I think if we start to look into some of those issues, we can really start to get to the root of this crisis. And I do agree it is a crisis, but I also think it's important to keep things in perspective. We certainly have a lower rate of mass shooting from many other countries across the world. And if you take out some of the big cities in the U.S. and the gang and drug-related instances of mass shootings, the United States is actually one of the safest places in the world. But of course, the Democrats and the media are going to politicize and weaponize this issue because their end goal is to disarm law-abiding U.S. citizens and make us a less free country as a result.
And you also bring up another interesting point at the American Greatness. You actually published an article there. I think it came out just yesterday, but I read it this morning, and the headline is quite eye-catching, at least in my opinion. It says the biggest threat to the Second Amendment, rhinos, or the second biggest threat, I should say. Talk to me about that, because I feel like we don't talk about that enough here on the right, because it's easy, as you said, to point to Democrats. They're literally insane. But everything they tell us is, we'll just vote more Republicans and that'll kind of fix things. But not exactly. Lay that out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we could talk about the Democrats and their theatrics on Capitol Hill and, their crocodile tears, et cetera. But the reality is we're facing a more insidious threat, and it's from the quote unquote right, or from our own party, these rhinos. You have people like Congressman Jacobs here in New York State, who is supporting gun confiscation. You have the gentleman from New Jersey, Congressman Chris Smith, a 42-year incumbent who has co-sponsored legislation with AOC and other Democrats and has a horrible rating from all the major pro-Second Amendment advocacy groups, and some of the best ratings from the gun-grabbing lobby in D.C. I mean, these are all supposed Republicans, many of which come from very conservative districts, rural districts where gun ownership is valued and has a higher rate of gun ownership. And they're very willing to throw their constituents under the bus and side with the Democrats because they have no beliefs and principles. So we need to have a much deeper understanding of this issue if we're actually going to maintain our Second Amendment rights. We can't simply rest on our laurels and say, oh, we got a Republican elected, or we've taken back the House, we've taken back the Senate. We need to make sure that the Republicans we are elected, and this is an issue that goes across the ideological spectrum. It doesn't just have to do with guns. It has to do with a whole litany of policy issues. We need to make sure that the Republicans we are electing are ideologically consistent, principled, conservatives, populists, America first representatives who are going to defend the rights of their law-abiding constituents against this unconstitutional gun grab by the Democrats and the left.
I'm just so done with so many Republicans. I kind of tune out most of them at this point. You could go through the entire laundry list. You had some House Republicans, though thankfully they backed off, but they did have a bill that was going to add in gender identity and sexual orientation into civil rights law. As you're talking about, we see with guns. Also in 2020, when the riots were happening, when they were going on Fox News every night saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe XYZ, all this stuff's going on. But they were also there on Capitol Hill saying, well, let's start writing exactly what the rioters want from us, police reform bill. And so I'm just really done with a lot of Republicans right now. So we see this bill, this more radical bill in the House that they're talking about. In the Senate, you see a bipartisan push, as you were talking about, with Republican and Democrat senators. Do you think we will see some type of gun control, gun grabbing legislation coming out here in the next few weeks?
I mean, I think they're going to try, and I'm hoping that we have the votes to kill it in the Senate. Look, if they want to get rid of the filibuster, which is their constant threat, I hope they're prepared for January of next year when the filibuster is gone, and hopefully we have some Republicans with backbone in office by then who are willing to throw this right back in their face. If they want to destroy, the norms of the American political process, which is based around the filibuster and supermajorities to build consensus, then that's fine. They could get rid of it, and then we'll simply throw it back in their face when we come to power, and we can have this seesaw back and forth. I only hope we have Republicans that do have a backbone come January of next year, when we inevitably take both the House and the Senate, who are willing to use their newfound positions of power to push through legislation to counteract whatever the Dems are going to try to push through between now and November. So this is setting the course for a bloody political type of back and forth fighting, and we're hopefully we'll be able to hold our ground and maintain our constitutional rights against this onslaught. But they're going to use every tool available to them now that they have the White House to push through this agenda.
And while you're talking, it reminded me another one I can add to my list of reasons why I'm angry at the GOP. Amnesty was another one. But Gavin, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.